Welcome to The Access. I'm your host, Hayvi Bouzo. In this episode, we are talking from inside of Bethesda Jewish Congregation, where we will be talking about dialogue between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity when it's most needed. Please welcome Rabbi Sunny Schnitzer of Bethesda Jewish Congregation. And also, please welcome Dr. Tarek Elgewhery, the Imam at the Islamic Culture Center of Potomac, Maryland. And also we have with us Pastor Dr. David Gray of Bradley Hills Presbyterian Church. And also please note that Bradley Hills Presbyterian Church and Bethesda Jewish Congregation have been sharing the same space for years. Thank you so much all for joining us for this special episode today.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.
A great pleasure. Thank you.
I want to start by talking about this initiative of having the three Abrahamic religions together in the church, in a synagogue, with an imam, talking to people from the United States, from all three religions, about maybe bridging gaps, maybe similarities. I mean, how long this has been going on, and do you see that there were tangible results of people seeing this happening?
Sonny, why don't you?
Yeah, I've been here the longest. I guess I'm the one that should answer that question. So the synagogue and the church have shared this building for over 50 years. I arrived in 2002, and the interfaith service between the church and the synagogue was a long-standing tradition. About 10 years ago, we decided that it was time to, and it was not long, of course, after 9/11, it was time to see if we could bring a mosque to join with us as well in both dialogue and in interfaith worship. We sort of tailor the service on this Sunday, and we've also done some Saturday morning services as well, so that all of our faith traditions are honored. We hear the call to worship from all three traditions. We read from all of our sacred texts, from the Holy Quran, the Torah, the Christian Bible, and so it started 10 years ago, and since then we've expanded to invite more Islamic communities to join us, and we have found that our communities relish this. It's one of those moments that really have become a part, at least for the two of us, and I know it's becoming that way also for Dr. Elgewhery's community, that people are beginning to see this as part of our identity, that this is very much part of who we are and what we believe.
I want to hear you, Dr. Elgewhery, about this in terms of the Muslim community in your mosque. How do you see this, the reaction and their, what do they think of these type of initiatives?
Well, it's funny. It's actually very easy for me and my community to, be part of something like this, and that's because the Quran itself quotes the Talmud, quotes the Torah, quotes Christ, talks about the sanctity of temples and churches and monasteries and monks, even from the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Christians that came from Yemen, they stayed in the mosque in Medina and they prayed in the mosque in Medina, their Christian prayer, and they went back safely with safe passage. So all of these episodes, I think sometimes as Muslims we forget. But because we are a minority community in the United States, we are able to remember them easier. And therefore, we're very excited. And the community is 100% behind this, something we look forward to every year. I look forward to it every year. My family looks forward to it every year. And this is not the only event that we do in the county. There are several events throughout the year that, we're the same usual suspects. We're always, going from, service to service. But we want everyone to understand that we are trying to express the most positive aspects of our faith traditions. And we are trying to use this as a platform for us to come together and address issues that concern all of us equally. And that's really what this is about.
Did you feel any resistance also from, some people maybe, Pastor Gray, just feeling like, we don't feel like there's a lot in common between Christianity and Islam, for example?
Yeah. And not really. There's been a strong feeling within the DNA of the church, in part because it has shared sacred space for 51 years with a Jewish congregation, and as Sonny mentioned, that's become part of the identity. So interfaith couples between the church and the synagogue, or between our church and other communities, Christian Muslim couples are in our congregation as well, and so the relationships between those have been a part of one of the tangible outcomes that you mentioned. So we really haven't had much pushback. Far from it. I just echo what the others two have said. It has been warmly received, and it's not just the service. The service springboards into other initiatives, whether it's adopting a refugee family between three faiths or having additional events, such as we had at the ICCP in September, talking about immigration, or we do other service and education programs throughout the county together. This is one of a movement of activities to try to bridge gaps, increase understanding, and provide hope for the future.
Rabbi Schnitzer, yes, you would like to add
Just to add that, to expand on what David just said, one of the projects that when the quote-unquote Muslim ban came from this current administration, immediately our congregations got together with other congregations in the area. We held a service together, and out of that we decided to sponsor a Syrian refugee family. Unfortunately, because of the changing dynamics of immigration law here in this country, that wasn't possible, so we now sponsor 2 families from Afghanistan. And so we are trying not just to talk about interfaith, but also to live it, to actually bear witness by being active in the world, trying to, in small ways, which ripple out, trying in small ways to fix these problems. And in the world, people fleeing from oppression, people fleeing from danger, and also to make a statement that we are a nation here in the United States of refugees and that all should be welcome.
And I want to ask you, Rabbi Schnitzer, about this, the commonalities between the 3 Abrahamic religions. How much are they? I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about what do you see in common between the 3 Abrahamic religions that probably the average viewer doesn't know?
I would say we have more in common than not. One of my teachers actually said the 3 Abrahamic faiths are like a Venn diagram. The only place where they butt heads are the smallest parts of the circle. So we all believe that the word of the living God, the one God, comes to us through various prophets, whether it's Moses, Muhammad, may his name be blessing, or Christ. All of us believe that it is through the experience of those who are closest to God that we too become more God-like. All of our traditions demand social justice of us. All of our traditions demand we look after the widow, the orphan, the poor. All of us are looking to actually lessen conflict in a world full of conflict, and our traditions are showing us ways to do it. I think also, to be honest, all of our traditions have some dark spots in them. And we can choose to focus on those, or we can focus on the light. And I think here we choose to focus on the light. Our words for peace, shalom, salam, I can give you half a dozen more words that are similar in our languages. But more important, the concepts are the same. We don't have to get hung up on various aspects of the Godhead. More to the point is we admit it exists, it's important to us, and that by tuning into what God wants from us and what God demands from us, we become better human beings and make a better world.
And I just want to add to that.
Please.
I think it's important. A lot of times people that are not familiar with interfaith activities, they feel that somehow we're trying to melt all the religions into one new religion. And this is not what this is about. Each religion is its own, stands on its own, and is respectful of one another. And quite the opposite. We don't want there to be any melting or diluting, but rather we want to share that which is common. Now, of course, there are differences. I mean, if any 2 people met on the street, there'll be differences. But the theological differences, those are things that are more for the academic, discussions of the religion. But here we're talking about using what's common for common action. So it's not enough that we just know one another. We want to know one another and work together to accomplish the goals that we all agree with.
And talking about the similarities, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm a better Christian as a result of my interactions with my brothers and sisters of the other congregations, because I am then inspired and forced to articulate what it means to be a Christian, to be able to explain that. to somebody else, whether publicly or privately. So the more interactions helps me to clarify and reflect on what does it mean to be a Christian. It also, there's a deep history, and the more I study the Old Testament, for instance, in the Hebrew, the more I benefit from a relationship with a rabbi or a community for which my own religion both forms and out of a region of the country, of the world, for which we all three come. And the other way that it has so much value, of course, is that we live in a world that is pluralistic, changing, and diverse. And in a part of the country here, but really all parts of the world are getting smaller. One has to be able to not just define one's own faith, but also respect, understand, learn from somebody else to thrive, succeed, or survive in a world. And for Christianity to thrive, succeed, and in the world, it learns from and gets stronger as a result of interactions. And the members of our congregation, to live in this community, to be able to understand how someone else's faith may motivate their own action and their own belief, their own family, is very enriching. And one of the wonders of a community like today, where you have three faiths together, that leads to then people having lunch together, which we had today, and getting to know each other. Just from our conversations, there were 2 or 3 follow-ups, people who I'd never met before, for whom there's something I'm going to do today as a result of this morning, which will lead me into deeper relationship with them. And none of them are from my own congregation.
But I mean, how often, or what's the percentage of the amount of this type of initiatives that we see here are around in terms of the Muslim community centers? How many do you think are open for this type of interaction? And do you think that you as an imam represent many other imams in this country or outside? Because we know that there's also a wave of more radical elements of sheikhs who kind of just tell people this is the right way of Islam, this is the authentic way, and somebody like you is an infidel, for example. I mean,
let me answer it in a slightly different way. My training is very classical and orthodox. In other words, I have been licensed to teach. I have an unbroken chain of transmission that goes from me all the way back to the Prophet, and I would prove anyone in the family of Islam, I'm saying, to criticize what I'm saying and what I'm doing. Not because this is my words or my own interpretation, but this is the tradition that I have inherited and that I work very hard to pass on to my children and my community. So I believe fundamentally that this is true Islam. Now, there are differences under true Islam that are legitimate. We have different ways of interpreting and things like that. But there is no valid interpretation in the name of Islam that is xenophobic, that is hateful, that is harmful, that seeks to sow discord amongst people, to kill innocent lives. I mean, the Quran is very replete with these warnings, even in the prima facie understanding of these verses and these hadith texts, that this is forbidden. The Quran quotes the Talmud in saying, and we have written and prescribed on the people of Israel that whoever kills an innocent life, it is as if they have killed all of humanity. I mean, this is very clear. You don't need a lot of interpretation to figure out what that verse means. So I believe that myself and the institution that trained me and the thousands of colleagues that I have all over the world, we are trying to revive this. In this country, more specifically in this county, I would say, all of the mosques that come to my off the top of my head, yes, they would want to and are participating. But I think there needs to be a level, a depth beyond just a show. We're not doing this because it looks good. We're doing this because we genuinely want to worship together and do something positive off the camera. So as we were saying, it's not the only thing that we do.
Yeah, you guys been doing it for
This is just the highlight because it's Thanksgiving and we all love Thanksgiving, so let's have a good time. But the real work is what we do when there are no cameras and and the busy schedule of our children and of our congregants. And many times I'll call Sonny, he's like, somebody died, I have to go to the hospital, and David's like, I have to get the kids to this practice and that practice, and I'm doing the same thing. But we still make time for each other because we believe that this is what our religions are asking us to do. So I dare anyone watching that is a Muslim to openly, I challenge them to show that
with
what I'm saying is wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, within the context of Islam, what I'm saying is wrong.
And I think this development in the United States in particular, and Canada, has been an evolution. It has taken some time. I recall that there were many people in the Jewish world after 9/11 and the Islamophobia that arose in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. There were a lot of Jewish communities who were like, no, we want to find Islamic communities to talk with. We want to begin a dialogue. We want to understand, because we can't believe, and we refuse to believe, that the religion motivated these heinous actions. And at first we found it was difficult. In fact, one of the common complaints in the Jewish community was we can't find the Islamic communities who will actually sit down with us in deep dialogue. But that didn't last. And I think over time there was a period necessary to overcome suspicion, to say, all right, let's try it. Let's stick our toe in the water and see what happens in the interaction. And they were rich and they were enriching. And now I'm gratified to say that after the shootings in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago, it was mosques around the country raising money for the families of the victims.
And I was going to talk about this.
And so we've come so far that we see each other no longer as the other. More and more we're seeing each other as common human beings and Americans. And that when an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. And we are in solidarity.
I also want to ask you, Pastor Gray, about this, because there is a wave of, in Christianity in general, in many churches in the United States, where they also see things in a more, right-wing kind of, just they see the stranger, whoever is different, in a negative light, which is not traditional in the United States. The United States has been always an open country for all religions. Minorities always felt safe, but we see this way. Why do you think? I mean, I know that people could say that this is administration has something to do with it, but others will argue that it's before. It's probably something deeper. Can you tell us a little bit more? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think that in Christianity, which is broad, regardless of whether one considers oneself an evangelical or a more progressive, there has been a condemnation of the kind of violence that right-wing Christianity can sometimes be attributed to for some of these heinous acts. So I think that even a born-again Christian with a very strong sense of their own identity in Jesus doesn't find within the text anything that incites violence. Jesus, either interpretation or the plain meaning of blessed are the peacemakers, calls folks to peace. And to the credit, even folks who have a view of God's relationship with humanity that is exclusive through Christ have been pretty condemning of violence. The challenge comes in sort of two ways. One is you do see heinous acts committed by folks who are Christian, and when they try, and I'll just speak for my own faith, to do it in the name of religion, thinking somehow that there's something that is threatened in their relationship with their understanding with God by somebody who doesn't share that view. They're not only misunderstanding it, but they have shed such a negative light on the faith that they end up being condemned by even folks who might have a much more exclusive view of the faith. And that part is positive in some of the reaction. What becomes problematic are some of the other themes which Sunny and Tarek lift up here, which have to do with one's own attempt to claim respect and identity, feeling threatened by changes in the world they don't understand, including the changes in religion, meaning the country is no longer as homogeneous as it was, and including not as being as homogeneous as it was in terms of religion. And so the reaction negatively to that, to lash out in ways, is obviously destructive against the law, against the faith as well. And we only can, as we talked in the service, we only can try and remake the fabric where we live. We hope that programs like this and others show that there is real joy in this kind of interaction. This is joyful. And if one has to choose between a path that seems negative, hateful, dreary, not life-giving on any level, and negative, or sees that when you actually relate to somebody who is different from you, that you see the changes going around in society, rather than being harmful and fear-inducing, but rather positive, enriching, and joyful, that path is the one we hope people will see as a result of what we're trying to do.
I want to point out that the voices that we hear, the laughter, is the people who are part of this.
Yes.
You see, they're joyful. They're happy.
The joyful, beautiful event that was happening today.
I'll tell you what they're doing, if I could. We have people of all three faiths are currently putting together baskets of food for two charities, A Wider Circle and the National Center of Children and Families, to help those in need in our county. And so, as we're speaking, in the room next door, there are children, including probably some of my own, maybe some of your, who are gathering and putting together these baskets of food for two local charities. So that's just an example of one of the many things, as Tarek was mentioning, this is not all that we do, this is a launching point. There's a service project going on, and we hear the voices of those who are putting together these baskets to bring to those in need. Yeah.
I want to ask you, Rabbi Schnitzer, about the situation in Israel. Is it true, as some people say, that there is a right-wing movement also in Israel today, but also in contrast in the United States, probably it's the opposite? Can you explain to us a little bit about the atmosphere in the Jewish community in the United States and in Israel?
You are asking the question at a time of great change at this moment. We are at a pivotal moment in relations between the North American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community.
Why?
Well, first of all, as a nation that's basically been continually at war with its neighbors now for going on 70 years, and longer if you want to go back before the founding of the modern state, there are always going to be people who are hardened by that experience. And it becomes an us or them. And there are certainly nationalists in Israel. There are those who are, I would say, outright racist. But there also is a portion of the Israeli right which is saying our Judaism, the way we practice it here in Israel amongst the Orthodox Jews, is the only right way. And the majority of Americans don't practice Judaism that way. So we have two different things happening. One is political, and yes, Israel has a right wing, and there for a long time has been in the United States a group of American Jews who say Israel right or wrong. Israel has the right to defend itself. It lives in a tough neighborhood, and therefore, they have to take care of themselves and defend themselves at all costs. More and more now, we're beginning to see a change here in the United States, where there is more questioning about the results and the effects of this prolonged period of war and this prolonged period of domination of the Palestinian people. So there's a changing mood here in America, but there's also, even more radically, a changing mood amongst American Jews that we have less in common with those who are religious in Israel than we had maybe even 50 years ago. And I've heard the first rumblings, as it were, of this division, which heretofore didn't exist.
That's very interesting to know. I mean, now we hear people say that it's the golden age of Christianity because there was a separation of the church and state, but in Islam it's like the Dark Ages. We've had times where Muslims and the Jewish people have worked together in a very amazing way, according to historians in Spain and elsewhere. There was obviously peace between Christians and Muslims at some point. Do you think that this is something that could be restored, that we could see this happening again? And what needs to be done in order to see this big wave of change, and especially when we talk about, like, today, what we have in the Middle East in terms of some people just not viewing the West, Christianity, Judaism, in the way that Muslims used to view them before, talking about centuries ago?
Well, in the Muslim majority world, we definitely have a problem of extremism, and it's a minority of the population, a very small minority actually. But because the acts that they perpetrate are so loud, we get this assumption that they are a lot. And for lack of a better word, people like me have essentially declared war on this fringe group. And my whole mission in life is to have my own community understand that these claims are complete. There's no room for this interpretation in the body of Islam whatsoever, as I've stated over and over again. And this is our challenge. Again, for lack of a better word, this is our jihad, is to let people in my community understand that this is incorrect.
So the jihad in a positive way,
of
saying
course,
that the word jihad
yes, of course,
is actually to try to change and shift
absolutely.
the narrative
absolutely.
in the Arab
because
Muslim
this is the religion of the Prophet, and the Prophet is described in the Quran as a mercy to mankind, not just to Muslims. So if I'm destroying everything around me, where's the mercy in that? I mean, that we've missed the whole point altogether. The Quran says we have not revealed the Quran to you to be miserable. Well, if people are being miserable in the name of Islam, something's gone wrong in our interpretation, in our actions, in our worship, etc. So yes, it's a problem. But to answer the question, will we get there? Absolutely. Because people of faith, we are always positive and optimistic, and we are living it out. We are living it out in our little neck of the world, our little neighborhood where we can. And we will continue to do it despite all odds and despite all costs, because we fundamentally, this is something we believe in. We're not doing this because it looks good or because we're being interviewed, no, we're doing this because this is stemming from belief. I pray when no one's watching. Why? Because I believe that that's what I'm supposed to do. And based on that belief are certain ideas that if I don't, this will happen, and if I do, this will happen. I'm not waiting for someone to see me to pray or to read the Quran or something like that. So this comes from belief. We believe that this is what we are supposed to. We were created to do this. We were created to work together, to work harmoniously with our neighbors and people of other faiths. So because it's a belief, it's not going anywhere. And hopefully, when we're long gone, our children and grandchildren will carry it on, and this will be the norm. And I believe that this will be the norm in America in the next generation.
Dr. Elgewhery said something during the service today, which I have been reflecting on, and I want more time to reflect on it still, and that is it is incumbent upon us to really understand and know more about our individual faith traditions, that we cannot just accept the word of an imam or a priest or pastor or rabbi. In every one of the fundamentalist sects, whether it is in Islam, Christianity, or Judaism, we have in the fundamentalist world, listen to what your rabbi teaches you. Don't worry about what the Torah says. Don't worry about what the Quran teaches. Listen to your imam and follow his word because he knows the correct way. That's the mistake, is because in fundamentalist strains of our religions, there's a tendency to tell the believer to listen to the words of a human being rather than to the word of God as it comes to us through our sacred texts. And the remedy for that is for each of us who are people of faith to understand the truth in the texts, to grapple with it, to wrestle with it. We are called Yisrael, a Hebrew word, Israel, but it really is not a country. Yisrael means the one who contends with and struggles with God. We struggle with the teaching. We're supposed to struggle with the teaching. It's not supposed to be black and white. It's not supposed to be easy. But if we go and undertake that God wrestling, then we will come out as our ancestor Jacob did, we come out stronger. We come out with stronger belief. We come out in the world being ready to be agents of the divine, using our hands as extensions of God.
I do want to talk about what happened in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, the attack against the synagogue. I mean, that was the biggest attack against Jewish worshippers in American history. And the United States has been the most safe place for the Jewish people. There is a history of persecution against the Jewish people in other parts of the world. I want to ask you about the response from the American Jewish community. I mean, what is the alarm here? What is happening in the United States? How could the people address this issue? And I mean, those people were attacked, and I want to ask also the Imam about this, that they were helping the Syrian refugees. HIAS was the biggest organization helping the Syrian refugees, and this person, the terrorist, attacked the synagogue based on the fact that they were bringing, Muslims and trying to change basically the demography of the United States. So it's really interconnected, and we see who's the perpetrators and who is being attacked here. What does that tell us about the situation today?
White nationalism is a historic issue. It is a huge problem, and one that this event today tries to counter. It is complicated. It is related in part to religion, but that white nationalism is related at least as much, I think, to some of the other factors we've talked about: fear, feeling lack of respect, identity, economic issues, lashing out at a world that is changing, and not being comfortable with diversity. Part of what we try to do in having some success, I think, is to provide some counter to that narrative, but then also thinking about the ways in which we address some of those things that go far beyond religion. I also think having, standing up, others, Dr. Elgewhery and others can talk about the Muslim response and raising $500,000 quickly to the Tree of Life. I mean, I went to the Anti-Defamation League dinner on Thursday to show support for part of the communities that are standing up against hate specifically. And the service there was a service here in this building, which Rabbi Schnitzer led on a week ago Friday, as a result of the deaths in Pittsburgh, of which there were many from our two congregations and others standing with our brothers and sisters in the Jewish world.
Mm-hmm. Rabbi Schnitzer, how do you respond to this?
Well, first, let me say that the gift from the Islamic communities to Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the money probably wasn't needed. More to the point, it was an expression of the purest of heart. We want to do something. What can we do? We don't know what to do. Let's do something, because we cannot just sit silent while our neighbor bleeds, as we read in our Bible. So I think, one, there's an emotional response that is worthy, that is very worthy and noble, that says, my brother is suffering. I have to do something. Nobody's told me yet what to do. It's only been hours. Nevertheless, this is what we can do immediately. Let's do it, and then we'll figure out what comes next, which we are now doing. I think it will take a long time for the American Jewish community to sort out the effect of the attacks in Pittsburgh. We know it was a person of unstable mentality that definitely was making these connections between Hayas's work on behalf of Syrian refugees and Jews, because the organization was founded by Jews 100 years ago and still to this day.
Survivors of the Holocaust.
Right. Even before the Holocaust, the original pogroms in Russia back at the turn of the 20th century. That's why Hayas was founded, to settle those people in the United States.
From the Tsar, running away from the Tsar. Okay.
Right. I think the president of Hayas said it best when he said, Hayas was founded to help Jewish refugees. Now Hayas helps refugees because we're Jewish. Which means that we're doing this because this is what our tradition demands of us. It's also what our humanity demands of us. So to attack innocent worshipers because of the actions of an organization, yes, it is anti-Semitism, there's no question. Is it a trend, or is it just the fact that something's happened in America to allow these people who have always held these feelings to be more vocal, to feel that they can say these things and perform these actions, like Charlottesville, the demonstrations there, with impunity? That's what's changed.
Okay, so yeah, exactly, I see what you mean. Dr. Elgewhery, I just wanted to ask you about this response by the Muslim communities and organizations to help the Jewish synagogue. Do the Muslims feel much closer to the Jewish community?
So
are they gravitating toward each other?
The initiative was started by a good friend of mine, Tarek Masidi, also a fellow Egyptian American. And Tarek, like many of us, and the key is that this was almost like a knee-jerk reaction. It wasn't, it wasn't delayed. I mean, this was the initial, immediate reaction rather. That how can we help them? I think when Jews and Muslims get together, it's either food or money. So I mean, obviously they didn't need food in this case. So the idea was, well, let's help. It wasn't that the community needs the money, but it was that that's what we can do. And the idea behind it is, this is a divine human right. This is a divine right, before it's a secular right. It's a religious right before it's a democratic right, that people have the right to assemble and to worship. And therefore, places of worship, whatever the religion may be, whatever the God is called, the Quran says these are sacred places, and were it not that God checks one people against another, these places will become destroyed. So therefore, when I read that verse, I understand that it is my religious obligation as a practicing Muslim to defend these places of worship. Not just the mosque, but a temple, a monastery, a church, a Zoroastrian temple, a Hindu temple, a Buddhist temple, a Jewish synagogue, any religious place, because the Quran says where God's name is mentioned often, meaning all of those places, God's name is being mentioned, exalted be He, of course in their own way. I'm not denying that. But the differences between the religious communities are irrelevant when it comes to this one divine right. And in this country, this is, one of the foundational, cornerstones of our nation. And to violate that it's insanity. There's no other way to say it. It's just insane. So what Tarek Masidi did and the campaign to raise money, it's really, I think, an enactment of this verse, of this sentiment. And I think that we all share the same sentiment. It's not just Muslims, but all of us would come to the defense, of any person's right to assemble to worship. I mean, you can't get more basic than that.
Would we see a Muslim congregation joining the Jewish Christian joint congregation? I mean, would that be something that
Inshallah.
we could see?
Can you hear us, son? May this be God's will, yes.
We're working towards that.
What would you like to add, Pastor?
Absolutely. No, it's great, and I think that for a number of reasons, when one envisions the future, as we talked about what it looks like, whether it's this building or whether it's our children or grandchildren, I think there's going to be more and more of what you've just said, because I think for a number of reasons, folks who see commonality have a role to play in creating diverse houses of worship that learn from each other. Our experience has been a positive one, and for anyone else who's considering expanding their own, diversity of the sacred, it does not, as my friends have said, does not take away from one's own deep personal relationship with God through the tradition that one has been raised. It is, in my experience here, it has really strengthened my understanding both of the world and my own forced, focus on my own faith, and I feel like I'm a better Christian, a deeper relationship with God, a better understanding of the totality of Jesus' ministry and the way in which it applies to the current world as a result of this kind of arrangement.
And I should also mention, in our community, we had to renovate our center for certain zoning reasons, and for almost a year, this is where we were worshiping, Friday, and then Ramadan services, and then our Eid celebrations, actually in the hall next door. So we have been. And
so it's been something that's been happening.
Of course, it has happened. Yeah. And as a Muslim in America, I mean, I grew up praying in every space possible, in basements and churches and schools, and so I'm used to not praying in a mosque because the mosque is not always readily available. But this is the trend. I mean, in other states this has happened, and in other countries even this has happened as well. And I think that as people of faith in the modern world, we feel we are kindred spirits because we are people of faith in the modern world. So it's almost like a rare species sometimes. So we migrate, I think, towards each other because there's a lot of values that we share.
And
yes,
we've
please.
actually been asked to model this, and we've become a model for others. Reverend Gray and I were called to a meeting a year ago at the National Cathedral downtown here in Washington with faith leaders, an imam, a pastor, I believe, as well as a representative from the Jewish community of Berlin, who were interested in setting up a similar model there called the House of One. And they are trying to obtain funding so that they can build a space that will be dedicated to all three faiths, and that where the communities will share both common space and individual worship space. So there will be, as we have here, a space that is primarily for Jewish worship and is primarily for Christian worship. And again, may it be God's will, we'll have a place for Muslim worship as well on this campus. That's what they're trying to do in Germany, and yet they will have common areas as well where the three communities will come together for fellowship, for working in the community. So we're very proud that somebody actually thought to call us and say, how do you do this?
So yes, it's been talked about. It's actually been something that was heard in Europe.
Yeah, and as Rabbi Schnitzer mentioned, there's been some notoriety. Whether it's the U.S. State Department or the Huffington Post or other outlets have publicly drawn a lot of attention to this kind of arrangement, specifically what we're doing here, and we're grateful for that. But part of it is just I feel better in my own faith and how God views my own ministry as a result of these interactions. You might have noticed when you walked in, perhaps you did not, but it's interesting when I fly over this building from some of the local airports that the sanctuary is in the shape of a cross. The Covenant Hall room is in the shape of a Star of David. If you look at the ceiling, the entire building is in the shape of a crescent if one walks from Memorial Hall over to the wing or the choir wing. So from God's view, you can see all three symbols in this building.
That's really amazing. I do want to ask one last point, and please, Rabbi Schnitzer, tell us, share with us your last point before I ask my last question.
Okay, fair enough. The best example I can give of how this can ripple out into the world. Many years ago, we were visited, the State Department made an arrangement. They brought a delegation from Kazakhstan here. All Muslim teachers, learned lay people, and they came to America to see how religions get along. This was an unknown concept, it seems, in Kazakhstan. So the delegation, which was all Muslim, there was one woman in particular walked around for the first half an hour with a very sour look on her face. And she's looking at everything, and she's scowling. And then I took them over to see a Torah, and I actually unrolled the scroll, and I began to chant for them from the Torah. And I said the word Uvenei Moshe, and the sons of Moses, and she went, Moshe, Musa? Musa's in the book? And I said, yes, Musa is in most of the book.
Moses.
Right, this is the book of Musa. And she goes, oh. Then we took her downstairs to see our nursery school rooms. And she, turns out, was an early childhood teacher. And she saw the classrooms and the picture of Noah and the ark and the animals and the carpeting that had Hebrew letters woven into the carpet. And you could see this change over her. And then in the wrap-up session, she says, I came here believing that Jews were monkeys and pigs. I see now that you are people of God. So we changed that mind. And I would hope that we can change minds the same way.
Lastly, I want to ask about the Holy Lands in the Middle East, the birth of all religions. Yeah. How do you think we can take that work that you're doing and maybe help bringing peace into the birthland of all religions? How could that be? How could this reflect and change the way things are today? I know this is a big question, but what would you imagine could be done to do this? Dr. Rabbi Schnitzer.
That is an eternal question that no one has been able to solve. As long as people feel that they must control that which really belongs to something much bigger than us, someone much bigger than us, we will always have conflict, because we are more concerned about land and real estate than we are about living God's word. When that day comes, yes, there will be a change. As one of my teachers once said, all of us, we're waiting for the same thing, we're just waiting a little differently. Whether you're waiting for the second coming, the first coming, or the hidden imam to come and reveal the true nature of the teaching.
Shia Islam, not
that's Shia Islam only?
Well,
okay,
we have the Mahdi.
The Mahdi? Okay, so, yes, so but we have the same concept, that someone is going to come around and show us the way. If you go into Jewish mysticism, into the Kabbalah, of course, which was this beautiful collaboration, really, this interaction between Sufi Islam and Jews in Spain, in the Kabbalah it says very clearly the Messiah arrives 1 minute after he is no longer needed. In other words, we will perfect the world that makes it possible for a messianic age. But how to get there is the great question. And for that, I'm afraid I have no answer. And I don't think anyone
What
does.
would you like to say, Dr. Elgewhery, about this?
I mean, of course, the question that you asked specifically, there's a lot of geopolitics involved, which is not my forte. So I understand that whatever I'm going to say, it has to be trickle down and somehow into reality, which I.
But how can we bring peace?
I'm getting there. But I think that I just want to make this disclaimer that this is not like I don't have the political or geopolitical answer. But from the lens of faith and religion, I think that we need to find a way that everyone is acknowledged for who they are, their communities, and their right to be and the right to worship. I mean, that's to follow everything that I've said, to be consistent. We also have to be consistent there as well. I was born in
fundamentally.
I was born in 1979. So when I was born as an Egyptian American, both countries that I belong to were at peace with Israel. I mean, peace. Of course, I understand Egypt and Israel's peace is a arm's length peace, but nonetheless, it was peace. Yes. So for me, growing up, I was born and raised after, the wars and after the conflict and the land and Sinai and all of that. So I came up in a world where this was just normal. So I'm trying to grapple with what is already is there.
Yes.
And I think part of wisdom, there's a hadith in which the Prophet says part of the wisdom of David in the Psalms is that the believer knows when they live and where they live. So you have to acknowledge that the time in which we live is not 1946 or it's not 1919 or it's 2018, 2019, and there are certain realities. So we have to base a future based on this reality. You can't just this is not some utopia that's magically going to come without actual work. So I think part of the reality is that there is an existing system. I don't know how much that's going to change, but what I care about the most, I always say, I don't care about Israel and Palestine, I care about Israelis and Palestinians. I care about the people. Yes. And I know that might be hard for some people to listen to, whether they're Arab or whether they're Muslim, but the idea is that we care about people. If we believe in everything that we just said, that means we have to care about all people. Now there are differences to whether they're Arab or whether they're Muslim, but the idea is that we care about people. If we believe in everything that we just said, that means we have to care about all people. Now there are differences, to be sure. I'm not trying to sugarcoat that, but part of caring for all people is that people have to have basic rights. Access to worship, access to a living, these type of things. Now, how that is constructed, I don't have the answer to that, of course. But that's how I think that with these ethical values that we have, that we all share, I think if we can always remind ourselves that that's really important for all people, I think if we can agree to that, then I think we can find a way forward. Inshallah, I hope.
Yeah, so peace and acknowledging the rights of all to be and live and worship.
It's one thing to say we tolerate each other. I put up with you, you put up with me. That's a poor way to live together. But when we learn to take care of each other's holy places as well as each other, something magical occurs. I went to Morocco a few years ago. The Moroccan Jewish community, which was once very large, has contracted for various reasons. It's now very small. Only a few thousand are left out of a population that was easily 250 to 300,000 back in the 1950s. And before. In all of the synagogues which the Moroccan government has decided to preserve, it is Muslims who are holding the keys and taking care of these holy places. And indeed, often Moroccans will come back for Jewish festivals like Passover or Yom Kippur, and it is their Muslim brothers and sisters who have made sure the places are kept and they're ready. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the keys are held by a Muslim family who looks after that space. Maybe that's the first step to peace, is to learning how to look after each other's holy places, and then we'll also learn how to look after the people that inhabit those places.
Well, I want to end on this beautiful note. Thank you so much all for joining us today.
Pleasure.
And would love to see you again all in the future.
Thanks, sir. Thanks very much.
Anytime.
Thank you. That was it for tonight's episode. Thank you for watching us. Good night.